Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Brad Hunstable to the show. Brad is the CEO and co founder of Linear Labs, a smarter energy company designing ultra high efficiency motors and generators. Linear Labs' patented breakthroughs lead to double the torque of competitive motors, increased range, and significantly lowered power consumption. Prior to founding Linear Labs, Brad served as CEO and founder of Ustream, a global enterprise software company. Under his leadership, Ustream powered the top global Fortune 500 companies, scaling to $40 million in revenue. In 2016, Ustream was acquired by IBM for $150 million and became the foundation of the IBM Cloud Video division. Brad, how are you doing today?
Hey, Raj, doing well. Thank you for having me.
Brad, thank you for joining us. Brad, how's your week going?
My week's going fantastic. The sun is shining. We're building a great company, trying to do something big. I've got a great team, so I cannot complain.
Well, I look forward to getting into the details with you. But before I do, I'd like to open the show by asking the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
Well, some may say there's a lot of interesting about me. Some may say there's not much interesting about me. Look, the biggest thing is, I'm a kid from Granbury, Texas. I grew up with a father who was very much, in my mind, my hero, a Da Vinci-like character, and who has always been there for me and inspired me, and that led me to go into West Point. And that experience shaped the rest of my life. And now I'm in my second startup, and I'm have the incredible blessing to work with my dad, and it's the honor of a lifetime.
It sounds beautiful, Brad. And since you mentioned second startup, can you give the audience an overview of Linear Labs and your role at the organization?
Yeah, Linear Labs, we believe, is the future of electrification. Our vision is to see if we can deflect human suffering through incredible feats of engineering, particularly around smarter energy utilization. I founded the company with my father. My father invented the first new class, we believe, the first new class of electric machines invented in 100 years. And that invention is the basis of the company. And we're building we think we're building the next Bosch, the next Siemens, and we're trying to do it here in Fort Worth, Texas.
So can you expand on what exactly that invention is and how it might change the landscape of energy?
Well, after I sold my last company to IBM, I wanted to do a project with my dad. My dad comes from the nuclear power industry, spent decades doing electrification systems and valves and motors and all that sort of stuff throughout the country during the heyday of the nuclear time period. And someone who I've always just had an incredible amount of respect for in terms of his engineering intellect. And what started off as a father-son project, I had this wild idea. I wonder if I could take old-timey Texas windmills and get not just water, which is what they're primarily used for. They pump water very effectively, take low-speed wind and create incredible amounts of torque in that pumping action to pump water for cattle or whatever it may be. My bright idea was, could we also get some amount of usable electricity in the same device? And the reason that was interesting to me was I felt like we could bring them to Africa or third world countries or whatever it may be, and change a lot of people's lives with clean water and some amount of electricity to heat a hot water heater so you can wash your hands, or provide some LEDs or whatever it may be. And through that unusual set of circumstances, which, by the way, conventional physics said this wasn't really possible, my dad made a discovery. And the discovery is a family of electric machines. And I'll give you a little bit of context. Every motor and generator designed today or used today, the designs date back all the way to the times of Tesla, of Faraday, of Edison. They really haven't changed. The fundamental architectures have not changed in 100 years. What my dad discovered is a new class of electric machines, both motors and generators. And originally, the discovery was a linear generator that was designed to be on this Texas windmill, and led to a fundamental breakthrough that some are calling as big a breakthrough as a major battery breakthrough. And so that linear generator led to a linear motor. That linear motor led to rotary motors and rotary generators. We have the global portfolio for this on the patent side. We believe that that's never occurred. No one's ever controlled the global portfolio for a class of machines. And it's a really unique machine and technology in that it produces incredible amounts of torque, and it does it at very low RPMs. And we do it at very high efficiencies, much higher than what's out there. And in some ways, that's always been the holy grail in electric machines, which is high torque. If you do it at low RPMs, you can eliminate the gearbox. High torque, no gearbox was always sort of what people wanted, and we believe we discovered it.
It's amazing. So, what are some of the use cases for the motor?
Well, look, I mean, electric motors are in everything, right? I mean, 50% of the world's electricity, on average, passes through some type of electric machine. And electric motors, they can be the very small you might see in your toothbrush, all the way up to the very big you might see in a mining truck or a generator, the size something like you might see in a dam, like 50 megawatts. The sizes can be all over the map. But our physics is consistent throughout those. We're entering the market initially sort of in that 1 to 5 horsepower on the rotary motor side. Why is that important? Well, one, 70% of all the motors in the world are under 5 horsepower, so it's an incredible market opportunity. And two, we provide incredible amounts of torque for that volume and that weight, which has a real market opportunity, not just to build a great business, but also to have a really big impact on energy. I do believe, and we've talked about this before the podcast, is that I think you can simplify almost all human suffering at its most basic level. I think fundamentally is an energy issue. 4 million people die a year from pollution-related diseases. 2 million people die a year from the lack of clean water. Wars are fought, started, and used as a weapon of suffering because of energy. All these things are energy. And even pandemics, like the one we're in now, you could make a case at its most basic level is an energy issue. The United Nations has come out and said the kilowatts per hour is sort of the most simple way per capita. Kilowatts per capita is the most simple way to sort of measure the suffering of a society. And so it's something that we're very passionate about. Obviously, there's a business to it, which is we want to go enter 5 horsepower and below, which looks like things like light electric vehicles. It could be small golf carts and scooters. It could be pumps. It could be air conditioners. It could be conveyor belts, a variety of industrial applications. But the vision, ultimately, why we're doing it is I think ultimately we want to be a part of helping in some amount of suffering across the world.
So, how does the cost of your motor compare to conventional motors that are out there in the market right now?
There's cost and there's price. I guess cost, if you're referring to the cost the customer would pay, I think generally speaking, we're going to be more. We believe we're a premium product. I mean, we're giving you more performance. I'll give you an example. In these light electric vehicles, so think of a light electric motorcycle or like one of those scooters that are now going electrified. If you take out the current motors and you put in our motor in the same volume, we increase the range of those about 100% by just replacing the motor. And we're going to give you more torque to go up a hill more effectively or whatever it may be. So there's more performance. So I think, we're not we don't view ourselves as a low cost, cheap motor by any means. And I don't think it's an effective strategy for a startup anyways. But at the end of the day, I mean, a motor is copper, it's steel, it's magnets, and these are kind of known prices. So it's not, there's no, we're not doing any kind of crazy physics or anything or black, dark energy or dark matter or something weird that will make this crazy expensive. I mean, it's still a motor. It's just a different architecture than no one had ever seen. And it has the similar materials that are in there. I will note that we use about 30% less copper than most motors. Our manufacturing process, we think over time, will be more efficient and less wasteful. And usually those things have result in savings. And so we're just now entering the market, but our general sense is, we're going to be more expensive. But if again, and certain customers are going to pay for that performance because if you can eliminate things like your gearbox in a golf cart or even eventually in a car, there's significant savings to the system in terms of weight, in terms of efficiency, in terms of cost. Those things translate into dollars. And so we believe that, this is a premium product and you will be able to realize other costs even if you pay a little bit more.
By the way, I agree with you regarding competing on price. That's just a race to the bottom. And you're also right about from a startup mentality, you know, that's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, so I look for two. I mean, one of the things when we got into linear labs that was, I guess, a blessing and a curse is that there's so many ways you can go, right? I mean, do you go try to talk to Tesla and get your brand new motor inside of Tesla? Maybe, maybe not. Do you go to try to get it inside of some big industrial application or in an air conditioner or in a scooter, whatever it be? Or do you do the generators? And so it's sort of a almost, I call it the salad bar problem, where you walk up to a salad bar and you have a plate and you look at the salad bar and everything looks good, but you can only fit so much on your plate. Those are really hard go to market decisions. And so the framework that I typically like to use in startups is what I call pain and velocity. Pain implies that I solve some sort of real problem for you as a customer. And if I do that, then my assumption is you'll pay a premium to solve your problem. And then velocity means that you can pay me quickly. And it doesn't do a startup a lot of good if it's if you can eventually get to market and I got to do a 10-year program or a 5-year program and go through all these hoops because it's a long sales cycle and a long test cycle and there's a significant, engineering and BD effort. That kills the startups. And so you need velocity as well. Someone how can I get in the market, get revenue, get the cash very, very rapidly. And pain and velocity, if you can find those, I believe is a winning formula for any startup.
Cash is king.
Correct.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned working with your dad. Your dad sounds like quite the tinkerer. Was he actually chasing this product or how did the idea come to him? What was aha moment?
Well, if you ask him, there really wasn't an aha moment. It was a series of painful mistakes and tries. Thomas Edison famously said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I only found out 10,000 ways it didn't work or something to that effect. And I think there was very much an element to this. The engineering design process is a long one. But starting in this weird area and having a viewpoint, my dad wasn't a traditional motor designer. It's not what he did for a living. We started out on a problem that was not even what we're trying to solve, which was how do we bring electricity through this windmill architecture in an efficient, productive manner to third world countries. And I think if we hadn't started, so part of it was we started in a weird place that ultimately led us to something that you would maybe, if you just thought the traditional ways, you would have gone in this weird direction. And so I don't know that I attribute necessarily as much as an aha moment, but I probably attribute it to a lot of really long, hard nights and a lot of mistakes and a little bit of luck, to be perfectly honest with you.
Luck always helps, doesn't it?
It does.
So you mentioned it a couple of times. You mentioned suffering around the globe. You just mentioned, interest in third world countries. The question I like to ask is the why behind what you're doing. But before I get there, where does this desire come from to help people that I'm going to say, quote unquote, are perhaps less fortunate than others or are struggling with, things like energy? Where does this come from?
Where does my desire to do that help that come
Correct.
from? I don't know. I mean, I had a good upbringing. My parents were great, and I had a very normal life. We grew up very, very modest, to say the least. We had financial challenges as a family sometimes, like anyone did in the '80s and saving loan scandal or whatever it may be. And I think ultimately, um, I believe in people. I grew up in Texas in a normal place, seeing some people suffer from a tornado getting hit them, or it was a family that didn't have all the resources, because they weren't even from this country originally, or just seeing. I grew up, also in the time of the Challenger. Even though it had a tragedy, the heyday of science and NASA exploration, where anything was possible. And so, I think some of that, all of those things combined, made me a little bit of a dreamer. But I hoped, and going to West Point, I think was really important to me as well. That you got to have. Sometimes you got to also serve something bigger than yourself. West Point's motto was duty, honor, and country. And there's a lot of. I mean, you do it for other reasons, but there's also a lot of personal, you know, um, in your heart, a lot of personal hope and joy you get from helping other people. And so, I think if you can find the intersection of all those things, why not?
I agree. Why not? And I'm sure there's people listening and people around us that also have this why not, but they don't actually take a step to do anything about it. You mentioned Ustream earlier, now Linear Labs. What allows you, what pushes you to take that step to actually, take action?
I think that's usually the hardest part for people who want to start a company. You hear about a lot of good ideas, but people don't actually take that first step. And I don't know if it's my military background, which is, you come up with a plan, and then once you get going, plans are kind of worthless, but planning is everything. I think Eisenhower said that. You have to have bias to action. There's sometimes you just to say, I don't know what to do, but let's do something. And just getting something in motion, is usually the hardest part. I mean, physics 101 is an object that's not in motion wants to stay not in motion, or an object in motion wants to stay in motion. And so just overcoming inertia, whether it's your own inertia or other forces, is usually the hardest part. And sometimes you just got to go. Bias to action, so you only think and plan for so long, but you just got to do something. And then look up and go, did we learn, and did we go left or did we go right? Okay, well, let's go right. I think entrepreneurs who can navigate that successfully, in my experience, are usually the ones that can get the momentum, because everything's, as you know, is stacked against you in a startup. Everything, and so, your inaction to get started is the ultimate thing that can get you for many people. And some of it's just you got to just say, you know, forget it, let's go, move out.
So, being a CEO of two companies, previously Ustream and now Linear Labs, how do you motivate others to stay in action or continue to take action?
Well, first thing is, I think you start with a really powerful vision and opportunity. That motivates people as much as anything, right? If you got a really big idea that they can get motivated around intrinsically, that's a powerful driver. I think second thing is treat people with respect, and be predictable. There's an old Army general told me something called TIPS, which stands for talk to people, keep them informed, be predictable, and be sincere. Talk to people means you actually talk to them. You don't just shoot emails. You can't lead over email that effectively, my judgment. So you got to talk to people. I stood for keep them informed. People, informed people make better decisions. You can't ever tell everybody everything in the company, but you should have some bias of transparency. Be predictable means be consistent in how you approach a problem, how you talk to people, how you approach a situation. Be predictable and consistent is an important trait of stability. And then, sincere is people are sincere means essence for sincere. And that, people are people. They have their own hopes, dreams, challenges, things going on in the background. So you have to be compassionate to that. People aren't robots, and you got to really care. People can read through nonsense if you don't care about them. They're not stupid. If all you care about the money and the exit, then probably have a tough time rallying people behind you. So,
And you mentioned challenges again as the leader of the company. What are some of the biggest challenges you've experienced as being a CEO?
Well, in a startup, it's always the number one challenge you always have is time is against you, which time then falls into cash or it falls into, getting enough people, enough resources. Those are always stacked against you as a startup. And the window's typically open and they're not open forever. You got to time these things in some ways, get a little lucky. So time is usually not on your side. That's probably the number one thing. And usually the biggest challenge for a company. In our case, we had a challenge of people even believing we had anything, right? I mean, if you tell people there hasn't been a new electric motor invented in 100 years in terms of an architecture, and then you're coming out saying you have done that and you're not from the space. And, people think you're crazy. And so, that's a challenge. And, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So you got to work through that. That was a challenge and, still working through some of that stuff, I guess. And I think, and then ultimately, um, just being having the fortitude when things aren't working to continue forward. That's always a challenge, right? Having the energy and the desire and to not get to forget fast and not get too down when things aren't working and keeping some perspective. Both that's a challenge for everybody in the company, and usually really a challenge for the CEO, who's obviously really close to all that.
Well, on the flip side of challenges, what are some of the most valuable lessons you'd say you've learned about yourself on your journey?
Let's see. Well, my journey started off, originally in the Army, and then I worked in the corporate world for a while. And then I had my first startup. Now this is my second one. So in many ways, I'm not making all the same mistakes I made in the first one. I think I'm smarter. I've got a little bit more patience, a little bit more understanding that this might happen or that might happen. So I roll with the punches a little bit more. I think in this journey, I didn't come from the hardware space, and so that's been it's always challenging to start a company in an area you don't have experience in, which was how I did my last company also. So there's a pretty steep learning curve. You got to quickly get up to speed, um, and hire really good people, which I think we've done. And so I think for me, this one has been had its own set of challenges. Bringing any hardware product to production for the first time is hard. Most people underestimate that, and I think I probably did too. But that's part of the process. You work through it, and you keep moving and you keep solving problems and go on to the next one.
That's the old adage, right? Hardware is hard.
Yeah, it is.
So it's 2030. You have a magic wand. What does the future hold for Linear Labs? What does that vision look like?
Well, my hope would be that these motors and generators are perforated throughout the world. My hope would be that these motors and generators are making systems more efficient or lower cost or giving more performance. My hope would be that what we call the system the HET, that the HET brand is on the outside of all sorts of incredible applications, and that it's representative of high performance, it's representative of high efficiency, it's representative of a customer or buyer who's conscientious of the world we live in and sustainability. And I think if we do that, then I think we have a good chance of leaving a lasting legacy, not only on the business world, but hopefully on Mother Earth and on a lot of people's lives as well.
I love the idea of a lasting legacy. Going back to your motor for a moment, the Honey Badger, who came up with the name and why?
Well, the Honey Badger is one of our test motors, and um, when you do various motors, that's not the one we're going to market with, but you give them a code name or whatever. We had one code name Atlas, and we had one one group of motors called the Honey Badger. It was the first one we started thinking about designing motors for micromobility and scooters and things that were going to be in the mud and beat up and has a lot of power in a small package, which kind of sounds like a honey badger so it sort of seemed fitting. And then there's that funny viral video, which I won't say the word, but a honey badger doesn't give a beep Is a viral video I always liked, and so it's fun. Sometimes you got to do stuff like that to keep everybody excited, and it's been a fun code name, one that we kind of talked a little bit about, not ultimately what we're going to use by any means, but nonetheless, that's the background.
Well, I like the idea, like you said earlier, about adding a little bit of fun to work.
Yeah, I mean, look, we got one life. You have some. If you're not having fun, then something's wrong. I would argue, right? So there's got to be a good balance. Not always fun. In fact, most of the time it might not be, but you got to find balance, undoubtedly.
I would agree. So, Brad, last question, and you've already sprinkled the conversation. People are paying attention with a lot of advice. But specific question is, if you could share some advice or words of wisdom, and it can be professional or personal, with the audience, what would it be?
Well, if you're an entrepreneur listening, and you want to start a company, my biggest piece of advice is going with eyes wide open that it's a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle choice. You have moments when people are going out and you're not. You'll be working weekends. It's a full time gig. And you need to go into that. And if you only do it for the money, you're not really passionate about what you're doing, then it's not going to be fun. And you won't succeed more likely than not. And you're just not going to be happy. And so if you have something that's really important and you're passionate about it and you're willing to take a chance and work through tough times and not quit, and many times when you're about to quit, but you just drive through it and know that it's a lifestyle, then I think you got a chance of success. And that's usually what I tell people who are thinking about getting out of the corporate world and starting their own company, which can be very fulfilling, not for everybody, but can be very fulfilling, but also will be a journey, and that journey can have a lot of bumps and backwards and up and down and be crazy. But if it's meaningful, it's probably worth it.
I like the idea of going into it with eyes wide open. And, you mentioned earlier, end human suffering around the globe. I look forward to Linear Labs accomplishing your vision. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we go?
No, Linear Labs is located in Fort Worth. I think Fort Worth, Dallas, and Texas more broadly has a real opportunity to be a global player in what I call Energy 2.0, which is to me is the next wave of electrification. Includes everything from obviously solar, renewables, wind, but also in the motor side, electrification drivetrains, which is what we're around, and then all the other incredible end applications that are springing up in Texas. So I think we have an incredible opportunity. Texas is a really exciting place to be right now for business, and particularly in this industry, which again I broadly call the next wave of electrification or Energy 2.0.
I wholeheartedly agree. I've been on at least 3 calls this week with different groups in North Texas around clean energy, clean tech, and this new, like you said, Energy 2.0. And I look forward to, working shoulder to shoulder with you to see, to make it happen.
Thank you, Raj. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.